Sean is feeling a false flag sensation. Everybody, it's Dr. Bruce Scott on our screen. Good morning, Bruce.
Morning, Sonia. How's it going?
Good, thank you. Can you see both of us?
Good to see both of you, yeah?
Hello,
Excellent.
mate. Hello.
Excellent. Everybody, psychoanalyst and author Bruce Scott. We're going to talk about the UK and Scottish COVID inquiry, Bruce. I already feel like swearing. Bruce, would it be fair to say that the cover-up continues?
I think it certainly does. From my perusal of some of the videos and some of the witnesses, it seems like the witnesses are misleading the inquiry from the behavioural science scientists camp, the Spy B lot, and John Edmonds, the computer modeler. And it's like almost like the barristers haven't got access to social media to look back at history. I mean, for example, there was an article that came out just a few weeks before, or a week or so before, Dame Lucy Yardley went on. She's one of the psychologists from Spy B, and they basically were saying that SAGE members were getting abuse from social media, from people, and they needed counselling, and their mental health was bad. And then Lucy Yardley from Spy B was on. And she was basically saying that she didn't agree with scaring the population, and the government ignored that. Well, if you just have a little quick Google search, you'll find that Lucy Yardley back in October 2020 was on social media, on mainstream news, calling for a circuit breaker and saying the government were ignoring her calls of alarm because people were going to die. And and back in May 2020, she was saying that we had to keep safe. We had to be more aware of the danger of this. And partly this article in the Guardian about the help they got for the abuse they were getting communications training. Well, didn't they tell them not to go in mainstream media and scare people?
Right.
And say the government were doing it all wrong?
There's an awful lot of backtracking, isn't there?
Well, that's just like that should be taken as a piece of evidence.
Right.
1 minute they're saying we didn't want to scare people, we needed counselling, and we got communications training and etc. from the government because of the abuse we're getting. But we went on mainstream media and were saying that the government were doing it all wrong and people were going to die. It doesn't add up.
Yeah, it doesn't add up.
No, and of course there was Susan Michie. She's one of the psychologists of Spy B, Professor Susan Michie.
Yeah, she's probably one of the more famous ones, isn't she? Because she did quite a lot of TV.
Yes, and yeah, she did.
She's the full-on Marxist, isn't she?
Yeah. Back in May 2020, before it was becoming kind of known to the public what was going on, she ran a very very unknown British Psychological Society webinar called The New Normal. And in that, she was talking about there's got to be no return to the new normal. And and she discussed how they were already talking about immunity passports in May 2020. Now, and so it was never about 3 weeks to flatten the curve. So there's a smoking gun here. It seems like there's a lot of rats trying to jump ship and pretend.
Yes.
I often likened it right at the beginning of the pandemic, so the use of applied psychology, to isolating people, controlling their work habits by shutting their businesses, etc., to domestic abuse, but on a mass scale. And now what's happened, when an abuser gets caught out for the abuse they've committed, they turn around and say they've been abused. They're gaslighting us.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, that is exactly it. So in the Scottish inquiry, we've heard some horrendous stuff about how elderly people were left to starve in their beds in these care homes. I mean, this is we knew there was a lot of problems. Obviously, I wasn't aware that elderly people were being left to starve, though.
Yeah, well, the families of bereaved, have got a group, have got a lawyer, and they've come out with some horrendous stuff that residents went to give water, they were left without food, without being cleaned, no visits from loved ones, basically left to die alone. And of course, but this is one of the most sinister things about it.
Awful.
This is the psychologists, the behavioral scientists, the public health the medical experts would have known this. One of the most mysterious things, I think, in medical care is if a loved one who's dying and someone comes in to hold their hand or speak to them, sometimes that is enough to keep them alive.
Right.
For like
So
another
they
2
denied,
weeks.
they denied this to old people. You know, I know people who had to say goodbye to their dying parents over WhatsApp, which is
Yeah.
ironic, considering
God.
the Scottish, in the Scottish news, it's all over the news at the moment that key
Oh,
figures in the Scottish government, including Sturgeon, Hamza
right.
Yousaf, Jason Leach, one of the medical advisors, have deleted their WhatsApp messages.
Yeah.
And that is,
Shocking.
and you know, considering what has happened, and considering what has happened, it is quite disgraceful, really. Patrick Harvey, one of the government ministers, Scottish Green Party, he had the audacity to say in the news, and this must be cutting to the relatives of the care home victims. And he said that it's no big deal.
What is no big deal? The wiping of messages, because
Yeah.
Nicola
The wiping
Sturgeon,
of messages.
Nicola
No
Sturgeon
big.
had manually deleted this. This was not a program,
Oh, wow.
or she had manually deleted the COVID-19 messages. That sounds problematic.
Yeah, and of course, there's also, I mean, a lot of these people on the relatives of the care home residents, they're very much, I would say, in the COVID narrative. They kind of believe the pandemic
Right.
kind of thrust. But that aside, of course, there's the excess deaths going on in Scotland, and I've got this. Well, I don't know if you can see this graph, but basically, there was 3,000 excess deaths in care homes in spring 2020. And then you look at this little graph here. I don't know if you see it, but it's probably by the light. But
Yeah.
the booster one, spring booster, winter booster, and deaths went up at every point in care homes for the COVID jabs.
It's
So there's
unbearable. It's really unbearable.
Mhm.
Bruce, I want to refer back to something that you introduced me to, and possibly lots of our audience, and that was the idea of menticide. And
Yes.
what we're seeing right now is clear menticide taking place. Explain that for people who don't understand what that is.
Well, menticide essentially is psychological people breaking down people psychologically through waves of hope and fear. So you had the initial COVID, for example, the first lockdown, the reprieve, the circuit breaker, Ukraine war. You have peaks and troughs of hope and fear, but also you have this narrative of confusion whereby you get people on the podium, the briefings, Boris Johnson, Patrick Vallance saying one thing, then you get members of Independent Sage saying that the government are doing it all wrong, right? And then they're saying, then they're saying, oh, we're getting abuse we don't want to fearmonger people, but and they're saying things like, oh, fear won't work. The psychologists are saying fear won't work, but this is essentially what's known as menticide, because of the confusion that it induces. But they know that they're doing this because this is old news. There is a document called Kubark Counterintelligence Interrogation. It's a CIA document of human manipulation, and it was released in the early 60s. And it was talking about in the context of breaking down people in one-to-one interrogation.
Right.
But the tactics they've used I believe, have been used on a mass scale, because one of the techniques is called the Alice in Wonderland effect, and I think that's what we're experiencing now with the pseudo inquiries and the gaslighting and the different stories, and he said that, and she said that. And this is a quote from the CIA document. The confusion technique is designed not only to obliterate the familiar, but replace it with the weird.
Oh,
Although this
Ooh.
method can be
oh,
employed by a single interrogator, it can be better adapted to use by two or three. It goes, no pattern of questions and answers is permitted to develop, nor do the questions themselves relate logically to each other. And if you look at the narrative in the COVID inquiries, you get the barristers asking these very just random questions about PPE and masks,
right.
and should we have locked down 3 weeks earlier,
Yeah.
or should we have had a circuit breaker? You know, completely, and of course the person watching is in the position of trying to find some sort of sure footing of what is going on,
Right.
but they're not meant to find what's
But
going
that
on.
establishes a narrative, doesn't it? Because the moment that you're put into the frame of should we have locked down earlier, as opposed to should we have locked down at all,
Yes.
it establishes a narrative so that it takes people down a path, right? It's a false dichotomy that they're creating, isn't it?
Well, it's what the CIA, where we're trying to induce in people to break them down psychologically, to make them to regress them, put them into regression. The Alice in Wonderland,
The form of brainwashing.
Yeah, essentially,
Yeah.
it can reinforce this effect. A subject who is cut off from the world, and people are cut off from the world in a cognitive way at the moment, because most people, who don't know what virus transmission is all about, or if a virus that even exists, or whether a vaccine works or not. People are are completely in an unfamiliar environment, and so they listen to all this noise coming from this inquiry, and people barristers pretending to be barristers, actually actors, because they're not actually looking at social media and saying to Dame Lucy Yardley, but you were scaring people on the mainstream news. Oh, Good Morning Britain, Susan Mitchell was scaring people.
Debbie
Susan
Schreeder, she was scaring people as well, wasn't she?
Oh yes, exactly. Debbie Schreider went into Newsround on it was a children's television show, and basically said to children that the Pfizer vaccine was 100% safe. Whilst they knew at that time, when she said that, she knew that there was a cardiac warning signal for young people.
It's shocking.
Where's Ofcom when you need them, eh?
Yeah, exactly. Bruce, do you think we're likely to get any decent truth out of these inquiries?
I think I read an article. I can't remember, a really good article, but the conclusion, I can't find it here. It's in my pile. But essentially, it'll be, we should have locked down harder. Lessons have been learned.
Right.
We should have locked down earlier, for longer. We'll have to get vaccines out quicker. We have to have better track and trace, better PPE.
Right. It's a narrative.
It'll be a Truman Show conclusion, and then it'll be, well, Lady Harlot of the UK inquiry. You can tell it's like a Punch and Judy show.
She's already kind of established where she's coming from in terms of masks, as one example. She's showing a clear bias, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was quite horrible to Professor Hennigan, Carl Hennigan.
Yes, heard about that.
I don't agree with everything he said, but
no,
he's had some good stuff, and she basically said, I don't regard what you said as really evidence. People got to remember, Carl Hennigan is called out the MHRA for approving vaginal mesh treatments for women. The Scottish government, you can't get it in Scotland now, vaginal mesh treatment, because of the harm it causes, and there was big payouts, etc., etc. So the point is the MHRA get it wrong. But if you were right to it, this is part of the Alice in Wonderland menticide we're experiencing. If any member of the public writes to their MP complaining about the MHRA, it's like the MHRA are good, they can do no wrong, believe.
It is. It's the same stuff. I mean, you're not going to, because they are all in lockstep, aren't they? Even the MPs are all in lockstep. So that is the reality of it. Bruce, it is it is an awful state of affairs. I'm so glad, though, that you're able to give us a psychological understanding of how we are being gaslit, because that's so important. That at least gives us some power in this. Everybody, this is Dr. Bruce Scott. We're going to put a link to his Twitter, really interesting Twitter. Bruce comments on a lot of really important issues. So thank you for joining us this morning, Bruce. We truly appreciate it. Take good care of yourself.
My pleasure.
Take
Sonia,
care.
Sean.
Bye.
Cheers,
Bye.
mate.
Bye. Yeah, menticide. That's what's been going on.